The Adult Ballet Studio is a podcast featuring conversations with the empowering voices of the adult ballet community, a world where passion has no limits and dreams can take flight. My name's Elizabeth Blossfield, and I'm an adult ballet dancer and your host. Welcome to the studio. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of the Adult Ballet Studio. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm so excited to share this podcast with you. I've been studying ballet since I was young, and while it's never been my official profession, it's always been a huge passion of mine. I couldn't imagine my life without it. And in trying to find ways to keep ballet as a big part of my life in adulthood, I found an amazing community of dancers who have either discovered ballet for the first time or rediscovered it as adults. Or like me, simply didn't want to ever stop dancing no matter their age. So I started this podcast to feature one-on-one conversations with adult dancers who have the same passion for ballet as I do, as well as the broader ballet community. There are so many great people working hard to make ballet more inclusive and diverse for dancers of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds, and I'm excited to meet as many of you as I can. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this very first episode. New episodes will be publishing on the first Tuesday of each month on Spotify, so if you like what you hear, be sure to mark your calendar to keep an eye out for more conversations just like this. This is a complete labor of love project for me, and I would love nothing more than to see this podcast grow, so it would help us out so much if you could follow and rate us on Spotify. A very cool guest joined the studio for this first episode. Patricia Pyrka is an adult ballet dancer living in Toronto, although she's currently in Europe for the summer, and she has such an inspiring story. She's a progressing ballet technique level 3 teacher, a coach for adult ballet beginners, and a blogger at Ballet Misfits. She has a background in strength and conditioning, and after being involved in lots of different sports like ice hockey, she told me that she first discovered ballet at the age of 37 with no prior dance experience. After working really hard, just 8 years later, she found herself getting accepted into Canada's prestigious National Ballet School for its teacher training program. She begins this September working toward a year-long certification. But she tells me that the first time she auditioned, she didn't even make it past the first round. She decided to try again a few years later in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's when she was accepted. We talk all about her perseverance and dedication to ballet, why failure doesn't mean you should give up, what her son, who has cerebral palsy and uses a wheelchair, has taught her about movement and finding new paths to achieving your goals, and why she's passionate about using her strengths as a teacher and a dancer to make the world of ballet more body positive, inclusive, and colorful. I was so honored to talk to Patricia. Check out what she had to say. Hey, Patricia, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, well, it's so great to meet you, and I'm really happy that you are able to do this. I know you've had a busy summer, so I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm happy to see a new project taking off. So, I'm happy to support.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And actually, this is exciting because this is my first interview for the podcast. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, wonderful. Feel honored.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to talk to you. I started the podcast because I've been studying ballet all my life, but, never professionally, just as, sort of a passion. And I've been so inspired by the community of adult ballet dancers that I've met just through, studying ballet and all the cool things that they're doing. And you're definitely one of them. So I have a million questions for you. I'm really excited for this conversation. But you're actually living in Europe right now. Is that right, for the summer?
Yeah, for the summer. Yeah, in July and August. And I'm in Toronto with my son. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Awesome. How have your travels been?
Good. Very, very good. And my son actually had surgery, like a planned surgery because he has a disability, cerebral palsy, and the surgery helped him with sort of restoring some range of motion by working with the fascia. And that was very successful, and he's doing really well. So I'm glad that went well, and now we're kind of focusing on the rehab part. So
yeah, that's great. Well, good luck to him with the rehab. I definitely, I've been reading a lot about your story, and I've read about your relationship with your son, and I'd love to talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah.
I just kind of, I wanted to start at the beginning. If you could just sort of tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're from Munich originally. Is that right?
Well, very originally, I'm from Poland. I was born in Poland, and my family immigrated to Germany when I was six years old. So, just starting grade one. So I grew up in the north of Germany, actually. And then later on moved to Munich, and that's where my son was born. And then, so Munich is kind of our home base now because I've lived there the longest. And my son has family here. And so this is where we're going to have a lot of friends here. So I like to reconnect with them regularly. And then Toronto came about 6 years ago.
Yeah. And I know that you're about to start studying at the National Ballet School in Toronto. Is that right?
Right. Yes. That's going to be start in September. Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk about that journey. I know you started ballet at the age of 37. What made you decide to sort of get into ballet, or what was your first introduction to it?
It was, I would say, by accident. I was in like team sports and endurance sports and weightlifting, and I was also working as a strength and conditioning coach in professional sports. So I was more into like the tough sports, and I never saw myself as a very coordinated person. But then there was a point in my early 30s where I felt like things were changing. Like I didn't crave the same intensity in sports anymore, or not the same type of intensity. And I got interested in dance, and I started with hip hop. So I started taking hip hop classes. And that was kind of an easy access because I always loved going out dancing and clubbing. And then as I was waiting for my classes in the studio, I would sometimes catch the end of a ballet class, and it looked very intimidating, but also interesting and intriguing. And at some point I thought maybe I could try it. Maybe it could make my hip hop dancing better. And so I tried, but then I got hooked. And at some point I stopped hip hop and I just did ballet.
That's so cool. I love how you started with hip hop. I find hip hop really intimidating because I've been studying ballet my whole life. I love the music, but I'm not coordinated enough to get all of those movements. I'm so used to being so upright with ballet.
It's a different kind of movement pattern. Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. But it's such a cool art form. And I love that you sort of transition that into ballet. And you mentioned that it was sort of intimidating at first, stepping into the studio. I know that feeling too, even, having been dancing most of my life. When I step into a new studio, or if I take a class with a different teacher, it still feels overwhelming. So when you first started, how did you get over those fears or some of that, intimidation?
The studio that I was taking my hip hop classes at, they had a very basic class. And so that felt okay, because I knew that a lot of people had also just started. So, so it felt like I could be there. And then at some point it's just getting over it, I guess, right? The last bit is always just, you kind of just do it, step through the fear. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And I started really slow. So I had like time constraints. My son was really small back then. Actually, he wasn't that small anymore, but there was still a lot of caretaking and whatever. So I started taking one class every other week. And so that was like a slow beginning, so it wasn't like all in.
Just sort of dipping your toes in.
Getting over it every other week was doable.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Feel the fear and do it anyway. That's such an important mentality, especially in ballet. We talk about that a lot of times in my classes with pirouettes, because so much of it is mental rather than physical. You just have to kind of get over that fear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, you mentioned that you had started attending classes once every other week and then sort of built up. I was reading that, now you take class almost every day. But it sounds like in just, 8 years, you made a ton of progress. And then you got accepted into Canada's National Ballet School for their teacher training program, which is a really, prestigious program. So can you talk about that journey and, what was the audition process like and how did you sort of decide to apply to the program?
Right. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I ramped up my training pretty quickly within the first 1 or 2 years. I was going to class basically every day back then, or 5 to 6 times a week. I practiced a lot at home, and I did like some little bit of conditioning and stretching because I was also never a flexible person, so that was also a little bit of a barrier. And then it was, I never thought of doing anything with ballet at my age. It was more like, okay, I'm just going to try to get a bit better. But then I would say naturally at some point when you engage with something at that intensity and, when it kind of takes over a good amount of your life, there is a point when you kind of start to wonder, how, what's the meaning of this for my life, right? And of course, learning ballet as an adult comes with certain experiences, and at some point, I felt I wanted to share those experiences, and I had also the whole strength and conditioning background, so I was thinking a lot about how to prepare a body for ballet. So I started with a blog basically, and just writing about things, and then just as naturally the idea of offering some strength and conditioning for people who started ballet as adults, just like me. And then from there, it was like, I wonder if I could also teach ballet itself, not just the conditioning around it. And then because I was in Toronto at that point, I knew about the National Ballet School and their teacher training program. So I auditioned in a brave moment. That was before COVID. The audition process is it's a two-step process. The first round is a ballet class that you take, and then if you make it through that round, the second step is a 2-day, 3 day something. I think 2-day seminar where you not only take class but also do like theory lessons on music and ballet history, and you have little exams, written and practical. But anyway, so I auditioned and I didn't even make it through the first round. And I thought, well, maybe that was a little bit too ambitious. The feedback was that my technique wasn't fluent enough, I would say. But also there were concerns that as a single mother, I would, I might have trouble being available for such an intense program, which basically goes 6 days a week. And anyway, so I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe, I'm just not going to teach. And then COVID came, and so this kind of lost relevance. But then just kind of suddenly after things opened up or started opening up, after COVID, I kind of felt it again that, it was still there, this idea to share things by teaching. And I felt, I never really had teachers who started late as adults. And I felt like that perspective of someone who started late, teaching other people who started late could be valuable. So I auditioned again. And this time it was a Zoom audition, so they were still auditioning on Zoom. That was last year, and it worked this time. So I made it through, and there were also interviews, and it was 3 years later, so I think my technique had improved somewhat. Of course, it's still not far from perfect. But I think there was more emphasis this time on, what really makes it teacher and what makes a good teacher. It's not necessarily technical perfection, but sort of, certain ideas about teaching. And there was also, like the idea of, can I handle such a workload as a single mother? It was still a topic, but I think there was also more openness to seeing how we could make this work. And also my son was older, so that also made a difference for me. Anyway, and I was supposed to start last year, but then I didn't get my study permit in time. Yeah, it was an exciting and nerve-wracking summer because I was raising funds for the tuition and I was waiting for that study permit. And the funds that I raised through crowdfunding, that part worked out, but the study permit worked out a bit too late. So everything had to be pushed back by a year, and I'm starting this September now.
Okay, got it. That's awesome. There are so many things that I love about that story. First of all, it really speaks to the fact that, when you discover something that you're passionate about, it just kind of won't leave you alone because, you auditioned the first time and you thought maybe this isn't for me. But then, a few years later, you were still thinking so much about it and went back to audition again. And just the idea of that perseverance, I think that's so inspiring and so important in the world of ballet when, it's so competitive and some of these auditions are so difficult. But also the fact that it was a multiple day audition. That's so stressful because you're sort of dragging it out over several days, this anxiety of thinking, what's going to happen? When am I going to get eliminated? So I just think your perseverance through the whole thing is so inspiring. And, also, I think I relate a lot to your story because during COVID, I started really studying, every day because I had nothing else to do. And that's when I really rediscovered how much I love ballet and kind of just said to myself, I'm just going to do it because I love it. I'm not going to, try to push myself super hard or have any, specific goals. I just want to enjoy it. And then it just kind of spiraled from there. I ended up, joining an amateur adult ballet company, Leaf Hurdle Ballet Company. And then it kind of led to me starting this podcast. So it sounds like you had sort of a similar journey, which is cool. But so, after, the first time you auditioned and you didn't get into the program and then you decided to go back and audition again, how did it feel to finally get the acceptance and realize that this dream that you had was becoming a reality?
It was one of those moments that, you kind of read a letter and it's, you see the words and then, it's just going to change everything. That's, it sounds a bit cliche, but that's how it felt like. And that, I don't even realize, how much that would impact my life. And I still don't know how it will. And, if to that extent, but that was sort of the first instinct. When I read that, it was, truly remarkable and special, truly remarkable and special moment. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting. It's coming up quick. So how long is the program?
So I'm doing the 1-year program for now. It's a certificate. So that wouldn't sort of qualify me for teaching at the school, for example, but I'm more interested in continuing to work with adults who started ballet late in their life. So let's see how the year goes. And, to me, taking a year off to go into a full-time program is quite a lot anyway.
Yeah.
And, they also have longer programs, like 3-year programs. Their 3-year program is their regular program, actually. But I don't see how I could do that. But, never say never, right? So we'll see.
And I know you mentioned something earlier, your Ballet Misfits blog that I wanted to talk about. It's really cool. You share, tips and different stories from your training. But how did you come up with the name Ballet Misfits?
It started as Late to the Party Ballet.
Okay.
And I renamed it because I wanted it to be a bit wider. So, a place for people who either started late or started within some other challenges maybe, or, had other unlikely paths into ballet. So so it's kind of that place for people who maybe even feel out of place a bit in ballet. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, I love that. And on your blog, you sort of, in the about section, you say that you were told you were too late to start ballet. You were taller than everyone in class. You didn't have, the flexibility or the turnout. How did you sort of learn to not take that criticism to heart, or to start focusing on your journey as an individual dancer and not compare yourself to other dancers?
I mean, it wasn't like open criticism. That's more like my own perception and sort of my inner experience, seeing a certain population in class or seeing how ballet is typically depicted in the outside world. I don't know. I guess it just felt good. I mean, that's the reason why I continued after that first class I took, because it just felt good in my body. So, there was only the option to either do it or not, or let myself be stopped by those parameters. And then I think with time, also realizing what my strengths were, or maybe my, what I could appreciate about my body and my way of doing ballet. And height is, when you're tall, it makes certain things harder because you need more strength, and it's harder to find a partner that's tall enough for pas de deux work. But there's also, it just also looks beautiful, and it takes up a lot of space. So there's that. And with the, other limitations like flexibility and turnout, I mean, flexibility is something that you can work on even at a later age. So I would say I made more progress there than I expected. And with turnout, I mean, it's still an ongoing journey for me. But I'm also learning how to work with it the way it is. And that, like, first of all, it doesn't matter as much as we think, because you can make it look good if you know how to work it. And it is what it is, right? So you either work with it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. You either do it or you don't. And I think dancers who are tall are so gorgeous, moving across the floor and in adagio and everything. But I know that we all, all of us as dancers have our internal criticism and ways that we compare ourselves. So I think you're right. There's so much to be said for discovering your strengths, and sort of as you, master a certain skill or build toward that, it really helps your confidence. And also just the feeling of being in your body and the movement and just enjoying the music also really helps as well. But I relate a lot to what you said about flexibility and turnout. That doesn't come naturally for me either. So it's an ongoing struggle. And I know there's a lot, with body acceptance and body positivity in ballet that's been sort of a struggle historically. So what would you say to dancers who are struggling with, either their bodies or how they look, or just any other types of, self-criticism that are sort of holding them back? What advice would you give them?
I think, to me, the antidote to like that harsh self-criticism and lack of appreciation for your body is taking good care of yourself in whatever way, mentally, but also physically, like treating your body well, and that starts to me with basic stuff like how you go through the day, and how you expose yourself to, I don't know, daylight, fresh air, water, good sleep. And then, figuring out what you need in order to take care of yourself mentally as well. How can you create spaces of self-appreciation? Or I have this image of, giving yourself a pat on the shoulder for what you're doing, actually, like literally like, that was, even if it didn't work out, that was a really good try, and it was brave. So that kind of inner language, in a way, that kind of inner speech, always coming back to it, because, we kind of fall into that self-critical view whenever we, see ourselves in the mirror and something doesn't look good. So you always have to come back. That's what I find. So I think it's kind of building that kind of relationship little by little every day. Nothing spectacular, really. I think everybody has to find their own kind of rituals, what that means for them throughout a day, and practices. And, like taking a class for me is such a ritual and daily practice. So that's a way of taking care of myself, no matter how well I do or how I look. But even if I just do it, and, I make the effort and I show up for myself, it's a way of showing up for yourself. That's one way of going about it for me. And I think, to me, it's, when there are specific things that I don't appreciate, I just, I let myself feel it, like I remember when I had, and I have that kind of on and off, that I feel a little bit more tight, and then I feel like I have less turnout and it just doesn't look as nice. I try to find, I really allow myself to see that. So I don't try to look away. And then I try to find something that that I appreciate about it. Like maybe I appreciate that my body is sort of responding in a way that works best for it in that moment. Like if the body tightens up, it means, there's something going on and maybe we need to take it a bit easier. So in a way, having a little bit less range of motion means it's the body doing its intelligent thing, right? So there's something to appreciate about that.
Yeah, that's all great advice. I love that last point. I've never actually thought about it that way, but it's so true. When your body tenses up, if you can't get that, full turnout that you're looking for, it's really just your body protecting yourself, because, you can injure yourself if you're forcing your turnout or if you're forcing your flexibility. Yeah. Exactly. So that's a great point to focus on, the positives about your body. Rather than just thinking of it as a negative. And I was also curious, obviously I'm sure your journey with ballet plays a huge part in this, but what has drawn you to the adult population of ballet dancers in particular? And why did you decide that you really want to focus on, teaching adults once you graduate from the program?
Well, naturally, it's kind of the population I really have the most access to, and I have experienced the most. And I'm fascinated by learning, and especially learning that is considered too late. That kind of the idea of lifelong learning, and that you can always get better at something, no matter at what age. But, the question is, what's different about learning as a child, and what does it need as, opposed to learning as a child? And that space, I'm really fascinated by it, both to see what evidence is out there, but also just by experimenting and trying things. And it's, like also overcoming those limiting beliefs. Many people start ballet because they think, they can get a little bit out of it, but maybe they don't believe that they can actually get a lot out of it, and that they can really build their body in a way that it is prepared for something like ballet. So it's also so there's so much diversity, right? Adult bodies, they're so diverse, and their history and backgrounds. So, compared to a pre-professional program where everybody kind of looks the same, I mean, hopefully that's starting to change too. But, where students are actually selected based on certain parameters, there is just way more to consider and to work with when you work with adults who started late, not as children.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's a perception with ballet that if you didn't start when you were, 6 or 7 years old and study your whole life, you can't get into it. But that's just not true. I mean, I think especially, for adults at any age, it's like if you love something, just do it and, focus on your personal goals and chip away at it little by little. It doesn't have to be something that you've, been working toward your whole life. You can start at any age. And I think that's so important to keep in mind too. And I love you do these talks, these too late starts and midlife pivots online talks. And I just think they're so great. Why did you start those and how do they work? What kind of things do you discuss and how do you sign up for them?
Yeah, so that was kind of something I started and I'm experimenting a little bit this summer. And there was only one online, but I did 2 in person. So basically that's taking certain aspects of my own story, how I kind of grew up and how, what kind of informed my perception of life and of learning and of fulfillment and putting it into, making a story out of it and starting a conversation with it, challenging certain ideas of how life should be lived and exploring how life can be lived in a way that works, and what works is so different for everybody. So, so it's kind of, I started it as a way to encourage different lifestyle designs, I would say, and to allow people to talk about things that are often stigmatized, right? If you start something late, if you make a career change and start something from scratch and leave everything that you've built behind, that is often, it's often stigmatized, and it can feel lonely. It can feel like everybody is doing their career and building their legacy, and when starting something new can feel very disorienting and very exposing in a way. So so those talks were to some extent about my ballet journey, but more beyond that, about how life can look like and how it doesn't have to look like, and that you are really in charge and everybody is in charge of how their lives can look like.
I love that. I think it's so great. I think you're right. There is sort of a stigma about starting something new later in life. And, some of it is that change is just always scary. But I think also, especially with social media, you see, all of your peers kind of building their careers, and you might see people that you went to school with who are really far into their careers. And you think, well, it's too late for me to start something new. But I just don't think that's ever true. And I love, you said in a previous interview, I can't remember what magazine, but you did an interview where you said our brains always crave learning, our bodies always crave movement, our souls always crave fulfillment. And that's sort of a lifelong endeavor. So I think that's part of it. Starting something new at any age is part of just keeping your brain and body fulfilled. So I think
absolutely, yeah, and like to kind of add to that idea, I think that a lot of the things that we consider as part of an aging process doesn't really have much to do with age, but more of the lack of that kind of stimulation, like lack of learning something new, lack of movement, lack of challenging yourself with new ideas about life and getting yourself into new environments. I think if you kind of keep that in your life to some extent, the people I've met that do that, their aging process looks much different.
That's awesome. That's a great point. And, sort of going along with that, tackling challenges and trying new things, you started a GoFundMe page, and you mentioned that you did crowdfunding to support the tuition costs of going to the National Ballet School. And you mentioned on your GoFundMe page that you've been really inspired by your son, who's in a wheelchair and has a disability, but there are pictures of him on the website, rock climbing, hiking, skiing. Can you talk about the ways that his dedication and his spirit have sort of inspired you in your ballet journey as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way there are quite close parallels. And I would say the main being we're both learning things late in life in terms of later than they are usually learned. He is working on his mobility and his ability to walk with canes and maybe a few steps unassisted, still at his age. He's now 16. So it also has a lot to do with learning past the typical windows of opportunity in childhood. And so that's the one thing. And the other thing is that just watching someone who experiences physical limitations to an extent that he uses a wheelchair, so his legs are mainly affected. Having such a joy moving and learning new movement skills, and it just makes me realize that is so innate, so inborn, that longing for expression within any kind of movement repertoire, and it doesn't have anything to do with where your ability is at a certain point. So that that's definitely a realization that he helped me gain, and also the encouragement to be patient and to give yourself time, and that there is no fixed timeline for learning skills, and that some skills might come easy to you, others not at all, and that's okay. And it's okay to work on things for a while and take a step back and maybe take a break or work on something else. So that kind of flexibility and patience around learning, that's also where he taught me a lot and still teaching me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, it sounds like nothing is going to stop him from achieving his goals. It definitely seems that way from the photos. And I think that's so inspiring. And, I think you're right. It's not always linear. And, one of the most important things I've learned, especially with ballet, is that you can make mistakes or have, failures and setbacks and still move forward and achieve your goals. And I think your, story about auditioning for National Ballet School is a testament to that as well. So it's important to, just always keep going. And yeah, you started this GoFundMe. It looked like you were about over halfway to your goal last time I checked. Are you still accepting donations, or, how can listeners support you in any way?
Yeah, I am. I basically managed to cover with the generous financial help from the National Ballet School. I managed to cover tuition funds. I'm still keeping the campaign open because I just want to build a little bit of a reserve for the extra support that my son will need while I'm in classes full time. I will be home much less than before. So yeah, maybe we can put a link in the show notes. It's also, it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial contribution. I'm also very appreciative when people just share the campaign within their networks on their social media. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, well, we'll be sharing it for sure. I'll include a link to your blog and also to the campaign on the podcast description, and listeners can support you any way they can. Yeah, because I know you're going to be very busy, 6 days a week, I think you said, right, with training.
Yeah, so actually, it looks like I might be able to keep it to 5 days, but I will have one very long day. Yeah.
Oh man.
But it's good because that will make things easier also with my son and for my son.
Awesome. Well, we're coming close to the end, but I do we have a section that I'm calling the Petit Allegro section. It's just supposed to be sort of a fun, even though I don't think Petit Allegro is particularly fun. It's my hardest part of class, but just like a fun section where I ask you a bunch of questions kind of about ballet, just like some fun questions. So I was curious, just to start off, what's the go-to item in your ballet bag that you sort of have to have at every class?
my warm-up booties, I guess.
Oh, those are great. I love those.
Yeah.
And do you normally wear your hair in a bun or a French twist or something else? What's your preferred hairstyle for ballet?
Usually a bun, a little bit more on the messy side. Yeah. And usually a high one. Yeah.
Yes. I can never get mine perfectly straight, and I'm always rushing with the bobby pins. So I relate to that.
Yeah. So usually I make mine without bobby pins. I just keep it in the, elastic. But sometimes I do take the time. Yeah. But it's more on the rare side.
Are you a jump person or a turn person?
Jump.
Grand or petit allegro?
I'd say grand. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, the music is always so luscious during Grand Allegro. It's really
nice. Yeah. And it just gives more time for jumping.
Yeah. Is there a famous ballet dancer that inspires you?
You know what? In terms of performing, I wouldn't want to name anyone because I've never been too much into watching. But in terms of teaching and that kind of lifelong learning, I have to say my teacher, Evelyn Hart, who I worked with, well, we're not actually working together right now, but I've studied with her for 2 years. She's a legendary former ballerina in Canada. And I completely admire how she, to me, kind of revolutionized how she teaches ballet, how she teaches turnout, and everything, technique, artistry, and how much time she dedicates to and has dedicated throughout her career to finding ways to learn and now, to teach. So it's her teaching quality that inspires me, but also seeing her move still at her age is quite inspiring as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, well, shout out to Evelyn Hart. She sounds like an amazing teacher. And those ballet instructors, especially early in your ballet journey, are so important. They're invaluable. So that's great. Do you have a pre-class routine? Do you, eat a particular snack, do particular stretches, or listen to music or anything?
Yeah, so nowadays I try to get in about half an hour early. And I use the time mainly for, I would say, waking up the nervous system. So a lot of releases, finding tight spots and releasing. I always carry an old tennis ball that is not too hard, that I can use to really open up the tissues. And I do tend to enjoy some static stretching before class, not too long of a holds and not too extreme, but something that feels good and that I feel opens up my body to what's coming. When I have a bit extra time, I usually also add some light tendus.
Okay.
Just to feel the mechanics. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I know you're traveling around Europe right now. Is there a city that you would love to travel to and dance in that you haven't been to?
That's a good question. None comes to mind right now. I'm just happy to be where I am at any moment. So there's nothing that just kind of grabs me right now.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're in a great place, with your son and with the National Ballet School coming up. It sounds like there are only exciting things ahead. So that's great. And, my last question for the Petit Allegro section is, in a perfect world, what would ballet look like or be? How would you describe it?
I think I would, in that perfect world, I would see even more variety than we have in a typical class. I would see not only people with different bodies and skin colors and backgrounds, but, also people with mobility devices and different physical abilities. And so it would look even more colorful in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're contributing to that change. And especially, as a teacher, I think you'll have a great opportunity to bring more inclusion into ballet. So I'm excited to see what you do next. And, speaking of, is there anything else that you wanted to, talk about, or any projects that you have coming up that you wanted to plug for listeners?
Right now, I'm just focusing on getting into shape for the program, and so that's kind of the main focus right now. But but I want to, I'm thinking about ways to stay connected with the community and also share that journey through the National Ballet School, through that 1-year program. Because it's, I think, something that a lot of people who started as adults don't really get to see, and I never got to see because I never trained in a professional environment like that. So that's definitely on my mind. How can I, bring that gift and share it with others? Yeah, because, a lot of people made it possible with their donation for me to be able to do this. So what's my way of now sharing this forward?
Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad you brought that up because, it does mention on the GoFundMe page that for everyone who donates, you're offering these Zoom talks that sort of give an inside look into your experience, which I think is so cool because you're right. Not everyone gets to have an experience like that. So it's cool to be, behind the scenes with you and see what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's awesome. And then, where can people find you? What are your social media handles, or if you want to give the website for your blog or anything like that?
Yeah. So the blog is at balletmisfits.dance. And then on social media, I'm Ballet Misfits everywhere, I think. I'm mainly on Instagram. That's my main channel. For more business-oriented people, I'm also on LinkedIn and with my full name, Patricia Pyrka. But I'm not that's more, to get in touch. I'm not really sharing much there yet. We'll see, maybe later.
Yeah, so Instagram and the blog for most of the content. And Patricia, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. You being my first interview, and it's just been so great to learn a little bit more about you and all the cool stuff that you're doing. So thanks for taking the time.
I appreciate your taking the time and doing what you do. You were super prepared. I enjoyed your questions. And, one thing I also appreciate is one thing that's always been driving my ballet journey too is to connect people who started late and people who started early. So, in a way, we're coming together with these two backgrounds in that regard. You as someone who did ballet for all her life. So, I really value these kind of conversations and connections.
Yeah, me too. It's so cool. And that's a big inspiration for why I wanted to start the podcast is just there's so many cool people within the adult ballet community, people who started early, who started late. And, it's so awesome to hear what everyone's doing. And I just find it really inspiring to be able to connect with people like you. So yeah, thank you again. And I'd love to stay in touch.
Me too.
You guys, I was so inspired talking to Patricia. Isn't she the coolest? I loved her advice about loving your body just the way it is and how to overcome some of the negativity and comparison when you're in the dance studio. We talked about her blog, Ballet Misfits, where she shares tips and stories from her own training. So you can follow her there at balletmisfits.dance. She also has started a GoFundMe campaign, which, along with the tuition assistance from the National Ballet School, has helped her fund her year-long teacher certification program. But she told me she's keeping the campaign open to help with additional care costs for her son during that time. I'll include a link to the GoFundMe page in the description of this podcast episode if you feel like you want to support her any way you can, either financially or by spreading the word. Thank you so much for listening to the Adult Ballet Studio's very first episode, and special thanks to Patricia for being my inaugural guest. New episodes publish on the first Tuesday of every month for Tutu Tuesday. I have a hard time saying that. And I have 2 equally cool guests joining the studio next month, so be sure to tune in for that. And in the meantime, if you liked this episode, and if I can ask you for one more little favor, please follow the Adult Ballet Studio and rate us on Spotify. It really helps. If you have questions or comments or want to suggest a guest, you can find me on Instagram at eBlossfield or email the podcast at theadultballetstudio@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. Happy dancing, and see you at the bar.